All right, take 200, the ones with the worst beat-up horses, and mind the store. Hum across, you take 302 of the 4-pounders and cross at the next ford down. I'll take 400 across at Marrax and work east and north. You can divide into 2 columns of 100 men and 1 gun apiece, but no smaller. There will be companies and parts of companies over there trying to reform. Break them up and burn the whole country out. Set fire to everything that'll make a smoke or a blaze after dark. Any refugees going north, give them a good scare, but don't stop them. We want Gormoth to think we have 3,000 or 4,000 men across the river. That'll take the pressure off Vrillos Gap and Lystramouth. He rose, and Frames took his seat. Horses were brought. He and Harmacross and the others mounted. The messenger from Seven Hills Valley refilled his mug and sat down, stretching his legs in front of him. He rode along the line of wagons, full of food people of Nostor wouldn't eat this winter, and cursed Gormoth for the lack and kegs of fire seed the slaves in Styphon's temple farms would have to toil to replace. He came to the guns and saw one at which he stopped. A long brass 18-pounder on a 2-wheeled cart, with a 4-wheeled cart for ammunition and to support the tail of the heavy timber stock. There was another behind it, and an officer in gilded armour sitting on the cart, morosely smoking a pipe. "Your guns, Captain?" he asked. They were. Prince Tosfi's guns now. "They're still yours, and good pay for their use. Gormoth of Nostor isn't our only enemy." The mercenary artilleryman grinned. "Then I'll take Tosfi's colours and my guns with me. You're Lord Kalvan? Is it really true that you make your own fire seed? What do you think we were shooting at you today, Sawdust?" He looked at the guns again. "We don't see brass guns around here." They'd been made, as he suspected, in Zygros. He looked at them again critically. There wasn't a thing wrong with Zygrossi brass casting. The captain was proud of them, and glad he wasn't going to lose them. He boasted about good shots they had made. "Well, you'll find one of my officers, Count Frames, back by that burned house and those big trees. Tell him I sent you. He's to do what he can to help you get those guns to Hostigos town." "Where are your men?" "Some of them got killed before we cried quits. The rest are back there with the others. They'll all take the red and blue along with me. I'll talk to you later. Good luck, Captain, and glad to have you with us." There were dead infantry all along the road, mostly killed from behind while running. Infantry who stood firm had a chance, usually a very good one, against cavalry. Infantry who ran had none at all. It grew progressively worse until he came to the river, where the 4-pounder crews were swabbing and polishing their pieces. Dark birds rose cawing and croaking and squawking when disturbed at their feast. Must be every crow and raven and buzzard in Hos Harfax. He even saw a few eagles. And the river, horse-knee deep at the ford, was tricky. Crossing, their mounts stumbled continuously on armour-weighted corpses. This one had been a real baddie for Nostor. "So your boy did it, all by himself," the lady history professor was saying. Verkan Vale nodded, grinning. They were in a seminar room at the university, lounging in seats facing a big map of 4th-level Aryan Trans-Pacific Hostigos, Nostor, northeastern Sarsk and northern Beshta. "Didn't I tell you he's a genius?" "Just how much genius did it take to lick a bunch of clunks like that?" the operations director challenged. "From all the reports I got on it, they licked themselves." "Well, a great deal, accurately to predict the mistakes they'd make, and then plan to take advantage of them," the elderly professor of paratemporal probability theory pronounced. He saw it as a brilliant theoretical accomplishment, vindicated by experiment. "I agree with Chief's Assistant Verkan. The man is a genius. Wait till we get this worked up a little more completely." He knew the military history of his own timeline, the historian said, and he knew how to apply it. She wasn't going to let her own subject be ignored. "Actually, I think Gormoth planned a good campaign against Tosfes and Chartifon. Without Kalvan, they'd never have won. Well, Tosfes and Chartifon fought a battle of their own and won, didn't they? More or less. Netzigon was supposed to wait across the river till Clestrius got up to Vrillos Gap, but Chartifon started cannonading him, ordnance engineering by Kalvan, and Netzigon couldn't take it. Well, why didn't he pull back out of range? He knew Chartifon couldn't get his cannon over the river. Oh, that wouldn't have been honourable. Besides, he didn't want the mercenaries to win the war. He wanted the honor of winning it." "How often I've heard that one!" The historian laughed. "But don't the hostage go in for this honor jazz too? On that cultural level? Sure, till Kalvan talked them out of it. As soon as he started making better than Styphon's powder, he gained a moral ascendancy over them. Indispensable man. And then the new swordplay, the new tactics, the artillery improvements. Now it's trust Lord Kalvan. Lord Kalvan is always right. He'll have to keep working at that. He won't dare make any mistakes. But what happened to Netzigon? He made 3 attempts to cross 100 yards of river in the face of an artillery superiority. That was when he lost most of his cavalry. Then he threw his infantry across at Vrilos, pushed Tosphys back into the gap, and started a flank attack on Styphon up the south bank of the river. Tosphys didn't stay pushed. He counterattacked and flanked Netzigon. Then the girl, Rila, took 100-odd cavalry across, burned Netzigon's camp, slaughtered a lot of camp followers, and started a panic in Netzigon's rear. "That was too bad about Rila," the lady historian said. He shrugged. "That can happen in battles, any size. That's why Dala's always worried when she hears I've been in one. Well, then everything went to pieces, and the pieces began breaking up. We had a couple of conveyors in on antigrav last night. They had to stay above 20,000 feet. We didn't want any heavenly portents on top of everything else, but they got some good infrared telephoto pictures. Fires all over the western end of Nostor, and for a 2-mile radius around Dissa, and in the southeast that was Kalvan and Harmacross, and a lot of entrenching and fortifying around Nostor town. Gorma thinks he's going to have to fight the next battle there." "That's ridiculous," the operations director declared. "It'll be a couple of weeks before Kalvan has his army reorganized after those 2 battles. And powder, how much do you suppose he has left?" 5 or 6 tons. That just came in a little after noon from our people in Hostigos town. After he crossed the river, Harmacross captured a wagon train. An archpriest of Styphon's house on his way to Nostor town with 4 tons of fire seed for Gormoth and 7,000 ounces of gold." The operations director whistled. "Man, that's making war support war now. And another ton or so in Klestros's supply train and Klestros's pay chest," he added. "Hostigos came out of this deal pretty well." "Wait till we get this all worked up," the paratemporal probability theorist was cackling. "Absolute proof of the decisive effect of one superior individual on the course of history. Kalthar Morth and his historical inevitability, and his vast impersonal social forces, indeed." Gormoth of Nostor stood with an arm over his companion's shoulder, nobly clad, freshly bathed and barbered, with a gold chain about his neck. Duke Skranger looked nothing like the vagrant horse trader who had come to Nostor half a moon ago. Together they stared at the crowd in the presence chamber. Netzigon, who had come stumbling in after midnight with all his guns and half his army lost, and the rest a frightened rabble. His cousin Fiblon, his ransom still unpaid. The nobles of the elite guard who had attended him yesterday, waiting with him for news of victory until news of defeat had come. 3 officers of Klestros's mercenaries who had got through Naza Gap, and several more who had managed to cross at Marak's Ford alive. And Viblos, the high priest, and with him Krastoklis, the archpriest of Styphon's house upon earth, and his black-armored guard captain, who had arrived with 6 men on broken-down horses at dawn. He hated the sight of all of them, and the 2 priests most of all, and wasted no words on them. "This is Duke Skranger. Next to me, he is first nobleman of Nostor. He takes precedence of all here." The faces in front of him went slack with amazement, then stiffened angrily. A mutter of protest was hushed almost as it began. "Do any object? Then he'd better be one who's served me half as well as Skranger, and I see none such here." He turned to Viblos. "What do you want here, and who's this with you?" "His sanctity, the archpriest Krastoklis, sent by his divinity Styphon's voice," Viblos began angrily. "And how has he fared, coming here? Set upon by Hostigi heathens, hounded through the hills like a deer, his people murdered, his wagons pillaged, his wagons by the mace of Galzar, my gold and fire seed sent me by Styphon's voice in his care, and look how he cared for it, he and Styphon between them. Blasphemy! A dozen voices said it at once, Viblers and Krastokles and the guard captains, and among others, Netzigons. Now, by Galzar, didn't he have a fine right to open his mouth here? Anger sickened him. In a moment he thought he would vomit pure bile. He strode to Netzigon, snatching the golden chief captain's chain from over his shoulders and striking him in the face with it, reviling him with obscenity upon malediction. "Out of my sight! I told you to wait at Lystra mouth for Clestres, not to throw your army away with his. By Galzar, I ought to flay you alive. Go now while you can. Speak not of your fire seed and your gold," Krastokles told him. "They were the god's gold and fire seed, to be given to you for use in the god's service at my discretion, and lost at your indiscretion, you witless fool in a yellow bedgown. Didn't you know a battle when you saw one in front of you? Viblos, take this fellow you brought, and get you back to your temple with him, and come here again at my bidding or at your peril. Now go." He looked at the golden chain in his hand, then tossed it over the head of his cousin Feblon. "I still thank you for losing me, Tar Dombra, but that's a handful of dried peas to what that son of a horseleech's daughter's lost me. Now, Galzar help you, you'll have to make an army out of what he's left you." "My ransom still needs paying," Feblon reminded him. "Till that's done, I'm still oath-bound." "So you are. 20,000 ounces of silver. Do you know where I can find it?" "I don't." "I do, Prince," Skranger said. "There should be 5 times that much in the treasure vault of the Temple of Styphon here." His horse stumbled, jerking him awake, and he got back onto the road. Behind him clattered 50-odd men, most more or less wounded, but none seriously. There had been a score on horse litters or barely able to cling to their mounts, but they had been left at the base hospital in Seven Hills Valley. He couldn't remember how long it had been since he had had his clothes off, or even all his armor. Except for pauses of a quarter hour now and then, he hadn't been out of the saddle since daybreak, when he had crossed the Aethan with the smoke of southern Nostor behind him. That had been as bad as Phil Sheridan in the Shenandoah, but every time some peasant's thatch blazed up, he knew it was burning holes in Prince Gormoth's morale. He had felt better about it after seeing the mile-wide swath of devastation along the main road in East Hostigos. At Sistros, there wasn't a house unburned. It stopped dramatically short at Fitra, and that made him feel best of all. And the story Harmacross, stragglers had told him, 15 8-horse wagons, 4 tons of fire seed, 7,000 ounces of gold. That was at least $150,000, 300 new calivers, and 600 pistols. A wagon load of plate armor. Too bad that archpriest got away. His execution would have been a big public attraction in Hostigos town. He had passed prisoners marching west, mercenaries, under arms and in good spirits, at least 1 pike or lance in each detachment sporting red and blue colors. Some of them shouted, "Down Styphon!" as he rode past. The back road from Fitra to Seven Hills Valley had not been so bad, but now, in what he had formerly known as Nittany Valley, the traffic became heavy again. Militia from Lystra Mouth and Vrelos marching like regulars, which was what they were now. Lines of farm wagons, piled with sacks and barrels and furniture that must have come from manor houses. Droves of cattle and droves of prisoners not in good spirits and not armed, under heavy guard. Nostori headed for labor camps and intensive Styphon is a fake indoctrination. And guns on 4-wheel carts that he couldn't remember from any Hostigi ordnance inventory. Hostigos town was in an all-time record traffic jam. He ran into the mercenary artillery captain, wearing his sword and dagger, with a strip of blue cloth that seemed to have been torn from a bedspread and a red strip from the bottom of a petticoat. He was magnificently drunk. "Lord Kalvan!" he shouted. "I saw your guns. They're wonderful. What god taught you that? Can you mount mine that way?" "I think so. I'll have a talk with you about it tomorrow, if I'm awake then." Harmacross was on his horse in the square, his rapier drawn, trying to untangle the chaos of wagons and carts and riders. He shouted to him above the din, "What the Styphon? When did we start using 3-star generals for traffic cops around here?" MPs, of course. How the devil had he forgotten about that? Memo, organize soonest. Just till I can get a detail here. I sent all my own crowd up to the castle with the wagons. He started to say something else, stopped and asked, "Did anybody tell you about Ryla?" He went cold under his scalding armour. "Great Drammel, no. What about her?" It seemed eternity before Harmacros answered, "She was hurt late yesterday across the river. Her horse threw her or something. I only know what one of Chartifon's aides told me. She's at the castle." "Thanks. I'll see you later." He ploughed his horse into the crowd. People got out of his way and yelled to those beyond. Outside town, the road was choked with things too big and slow to get out of the way, and mostly he rode in the ditch. The wagons Harmacros had captured were going up to Tar Hostigos, huge covered things like Conestogas with the drivers riding the nigh horses. He thought he'd never get past them. There was always another one ahead. Finally, he rode through the outer gate of Tar Hostigos. Throwing his reins to somebody, he stumbled up the steps to the keep and through the door. From the staff room he heard laughing voices, Tosfi's among them. For an instant he was horrified. Then a little reassured. If Tosfi's could laugh, maybe it wasn't so bad. He was mobbed as soon as he entered. Everybody was shouting his name and thumping him on the back. He was glad for his armour. A goblet of wine was thrust into his hand. Tosfis, Zentos, Chartiphon, most of the general staff, and a dozen officers decked with red and blue, whom he had never seen before. "Kalvan, this is General Clestrus," Tosfis was saying, to introduce a big man with grey hair and a florid face. "An honour, General. You fought most brilliantly and valiantly." He'd fought like a damned imbecile, and his army had been chopped to hamburger, but let's be polite. He raised his goblet to the mercenary and drank. It was winter wine, set out in tubs to freeze, and the ice thrown off until it was almost as strong as brandy, maybe 60 proof, the closest they had to spirits here and now. It made him feel better, and he drank more. "Rilla, what happened to her?" he asked her father. "Why, she broke a leg," Tosfis began. That scared him. People had died of broken legs in his former world, when the level of the medical art was at least up to here and now. They used to amputate. "She's all right, Kalvan," Zentos was saying. "None of us would be here if she were in any danger. Brother Mitron is with her. If she's awake, she'll want to see you. Then I'll go to her." He finished his wine and put the goblet down, drew off his helmet and coif and put them beside it, stuffed his gloves through his belt. "You'll all excuse me." Rila, whom he had expected to find gasping her last, sat propped against a pile of pillows in bed, smoking a pipe with a cane stem and a silver-inlaid redstone bowl. She wore a loose gown, and her right leg was buckled to a huge contraption of saddle leather. Mitron, the chubby priest-physician, was with her, as were several of the women who functioned as midwives, herb boilers, hexers, and general nurses. Rilla saw him first. Her face lighted like sunrise. "Hi, Kalvan. Are you all right? When did you get in? How was the battle?" "Rilla, darling." The women sprayed away from in front of him like grasshoppers. She flung her arms around his neck as he bent over her. He thought Mitron stepped in to relieve her of the pipe. "What happened to you?" "You stopped in the staff room," she told him, between kisses. "I smell it on you." "Well, what did happen?" "Oh, my horse fell on me. We were burning a Nostori village, and he stepped on a hot ember." Yes, just like William the Conqueror. Nantes, 1087, the history professor in the back of his mind reminded him. "He almost threw me and then fell over something, and down we both went. I had an extra pair of pistols down my boot tops. I fell on one of them. The horse broke a leg, too, and they shot him." "How is she, Mitron?" "Nothing to worry about, Lord Kalvan. It's a beautiful fracture. A priest of Galzar set it, and gave me a Styphon's own lump on the head, too. And now it'll be a couple of moons till we can have a wedding. Why, we could have it now. I will not be married in my bedroom. I will be married in the temple, and I won't be on crutches. It's your wedding, Princess." He hoped that the war with Sask everybody expected would be out of the way before she was back in the saddle. "Somebody," he said over his shoulder, "go and have a hot bath brought to my room and tell me when it's ready. I must stink to the very throne of Dralm." "I was wondering when you'd mention that, darling." Sesklos, supreme priest, and Styphon's voice rested his elbows on the table and palmed his smarting eyes. Around him pens scratched and parchments rustled and tablets clattered. He longed for the cool quiet of the innermost circle, but there was so much to do. The letter from the archpriest of the great temple of Hos Agris lay before him. News of the defeat of Prince Gormoth's armies was spreading, and with it rumours that Tosphys of Hostigos was making fireseed for himself. Agents inquisitory reported that the ingredients and even the proportions and processes were being bandied in the taverns. To kill everyone who knew the secret was quite out of the question. Even a pestilence couldn't do that. And how to check the spread of the secret without further divulging it? He opened his eyes. Admit it. Better that than deny it and later be proven liars. Let everyone, even the lay guards, know the full secret, but for believers, insist that special prayers and rites, which only yellow-robed priests could perform, were necessary. But why? Soon it would be known to all that fireseed made by unconsecrated hands would fire as well. Well, there were malignant demons of the netherworld. Everybody knew that. He smiled, imagining them thronging about, scrawny bodies, bat wings, bristling beards, clawed and fanged. In fireseed there were many of them, and only the prayers of anointed priests of Styphon could slay them. If this were not done as soon as the fireseed was exploded, they would be set free into the world of men to work manifold evils and frights. And, of course, the curse of Styphon was upon all who made fireseed unconsecrated. But Tosphys had made fireseed and had not been smitten, and he had pillaged a temple farm and massacred the priests, and after that he had defeated the armies of Prince Gormoth, who marched with Styphon's blessing. How about that now? But wait! Gormoth was no better than Tosphys. He had made fireseed himself. Both Crastocles and Viblus were sure of it, and he had blasphemed Styphon, and despitefully used a holy archpriest, and forced 100,000 ounces of silver from the Nostor temple, at as close pistol point as didn't matter. To be sure, most of that had been after the battle, but who outside Nostor would know that? Gormoth had suffered defeat for his sins. He was smiling happily now. Of course, Hostigos must be utterly destroyed and ruined, and all in it put to the sword. The world must see, once and for all, what befell a land that turned its back on Styphon. Sarask of Sask would have to do that. Gormoth couldn't, even if he could be trusted to. Sarask and Balthar, Prince of Beshta. Sarask had been seeking a Beshtan alliance, and now was offering his Doramnita in marriage to Prince Balthar's younger brother, Balthams. An idea began to seep up into his mind. Balthams wanted to be a prince, too. It needed only a poisoned cup or a hired dagger to make him Prince of Beshta, and Balthar knew it. He wanted Balthams and his ambitions removed. Should have had him killed long ago. Now, suppose Balthams married this wench of Sarask's. Suppose Sarask gave up a little corner of Sask and Balthar a little corner of Beshta, both adjoining Hostigos. Call it the princedom of Sashta. To it could be added all western Hostigos south of the mountains. Why, that would be a nice little princedom for any young couple, he smiled benevolently. And the father of the bride and the brother of the groom could recompense themselves, respectively, with the Lystra Valley, rich in iron, and East Hostigos. That should be done immediately before winter set in. Then, in the spring, Sarask, Balthames, and Balthar could hurl their combined armies out of conquered Hostigos into Nostor. He'd send out another archpriest of Styphon's house upon earth. Let's see who that should be. To Sask, to make arrangements with lavish gifts of money and fireseed for Sarask and Balthar. And this time make sure the treasures of Styphon's house did not fall into the hands of the infidel.